While a lot of criticism has been thrown at Josh Giddey so far this season, we're talking about some interesting stats that point to both Josh Giddey and Ayo Dosunmu being problems for the Bulls according to the numbers. We're going to take a look at that. Plus, we're going to talk about it and ask the question, where does Zach LaVine really rank all time as a Chicago Bull? And lastly, we're going to preview the game against the Milwaukee Bucks. All that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
Well, what's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. And I got to give credit out to Salim in this one. Salim BG Hoops, if you guys want to follow him on Twitter. He pointed out some concerning stats when it comes to Ayo Dosunmu and Josh Giddey. The Josh Giddey ones have been talked about kind of ad nauseum at this point. We're going to touch on them as well in the framework of this. But, you know, he tweeted out it is saying that it seems like Josh Giddey is taking the heat off Ayo Dosunmu, which is interesting enough. We know that Ayo has had a slow start to the season. His offense has kind of come and gone. He hasn't really been as efficient as what he was last year. And Ayo, of course, has the reputation of being a really good defender, right? But when you look at the on-off numbers for Ayo Dosunmu, it's actually painting a pretty concerning picture at this early part of the season. Now, I want to be clear. These numbers could very well change, and they could change, as for both Josh Giddey and Ayo Dosunmu, and everything that we talk about is all in the framework of up until this point, right? Things can change. Guys have been basketball fans long enough. You know that all it takes is a hot week, a hot month, and things can really turn around for a player for sure. But right now, the Bulls are, two players that are key in their rotation are really kind of, struggling right now for the Chicago Bulls. And Ayo Dosunmu is not up, one that is avoiding that at all either. And Ayo is coming into the season playing a very important role for the Chicago Bulls, playing multiple positions. He's lined up as small forward and shooting guard more than point guard so far this year, which isn't really too out of the realm when you look at last year. So far this season, Ayo's played 66% of his minutes at the shooting guard position and 23 of his minutes at the small forward, with 11 of that coming in at point guard. That's similar to the balance last year as well, but so it is a different role in a way for Ayo Dosunmu. But when you just look at what the on-off are, when Ayo Dosunmu is on the court for the Chicago Bulls, the Bulls have a negative 10.8 point differential. Again, the numbers are the numbers. We're also scoring 4.4 points less per 100 possessions when Ayo Dosunmu is on the court. And for a player in Ayo who is known as a defender, right now, Ayo is in the bottom 19% of the league when it comes to his impact defensively per points 100 possessions. Now, these stats aren't everything, as I've said with everything when we look at it. But right now, through this part of the season, teams are outscoring the Bulls by 6.4 per 100 possessions when Ayo Dosunmu is on the court. They're also shooting a better and higher effective field goal rate as well, and they're getting to the free throw line a little bit more. Now, these aren't completely all on Ayo Dosunmu, but when you add into that as well, outside of the net rating, the Bulls' offensive rating gets better by six when he's off the court at 115 offensive rating, 109 when he's on the court. And for the first time in one of Ayo Dosunmu's career, one of the seasons of Ayo Dosunmu's career, the Bulls have been have a better defensive rating when he's off the court as well. 119 when he's on, 115 when he's off the court. Keep in mind as well, defensive rating, the lower number is the better number for defensive rating, whereas offensive rating, the higher number is the better number. So just to put that in the framework. And so, that shows, at least for right now, Ayo Dosunmu does not seem to be having the defensive impact that he's had in prior seasons. And so when you also aren't scoring well, it makes that, of course, a lot louder when it comes down to it. So this is the worst points per 100 possession narrative that's been around Ayo Dosunmu since he's come in the league. And a matter of fact, right, it's both of these guys, right? So we want to be clear here. It's not just Ayo Dosunmu. Josh Giddey as well. When Josh Giddey is off the court, the Bulls are a much better team in both defense. We talked about it a lot here, right? And, I could go over it again, but basically the Bulls win almost every minute when Josh Giddey's not on the court. That just is what the numbers tell us. That's what's supported here. Outside of some, assist numbers or whatever else, that the Bulls have been a considerably better offensive and defensive team as of right now when Josh Giddey's off the court. When he's on the court, we're 11 points worse as far as point differential, and 1.2 points worse per 100 possessions as well. And teams are scoring 10 more points per 100 possessions when he's on the court, and also shooting a better effective field goal percentage of 6.2%. And then when you combine these two, right? When you combine these two, it's crazy as well. When Ayo Dosunmu and Josh Giddey are both off the court for the Bulls, right, which has only been 77 minutes. So the Bulls have only played 77 minutes of those guys not being on the court, either one of those guys not being on the court. But we have a net rating of 8.5, and then an offensive rating of 122 and a defensive rating of 113.53. So, that's what, again, analytics, numbers, that's what they're telling us right now. And again, with everything, it could come down to who do you have on the court at the right times. Now, Ayo Dosunmu is part of more overall plus lineups than Josh Giddey, but I talked about it before. I don't want to make it this huge thing between Ayo and Josh Giddey. That's not what it comes down to. They've been better when they're on the court together as well, but that's another thing when it comes down to it. When you look at it, the Bulls have a negative 18.39 rating when they're both on the court together. And plus 8.56 when they're off the court together. So it's just something to look at and monitor. And again, as I say with all these kind of analytics and stats, when it comes down to it, it really comes down to how the coaching staff uses this to inform what they're doing, the balance that you have as far as your lineups. Who do you have out there together is as important as when you bring guys in, right? So you got to find the right balance between guys. And right now, I don't think that that's been done as consistently, right? And that goes back to the button mashing Bulls, as I've been calling them when it comes to the offense, at least, is that it really just seems like the Bulls are just doing things right now to try to see what sticks. They're trying to play guys, according to whatever, right? And it doesn't really feel like the coaching staff has gotten into the bag of trying to balance the offense, defense, trying to balance skill set as far as three-point shooting, slashing, those type of things when it comes down to it. So, at the end of the day, I think Ayo Dosunmu, we knew and we saw it last year, he really did a good job at turning into a change of pace guard for the Chicago Bulls. Coming in, pushing the break. He's a really good passer in transition. When he slashes, he's really good. He's really gotten better at finishing around the rim. And so these are two guys that at this early part of the season, and I want to keep highlighting that it's still a very early part of the season, have just not had the impact that you want to see from either one of these guys. And, is that going to come around? Yeah, I think it's going to come around, right? And that's for both of these guys. It's not just for Josh Giddey or just for Coby White. They have things that they can do. The team hasn't overall been playing too good either, right? So that comes down to it as well. But that just goes to, it's a important part to balance rotation. It's very important to be able to do that. That's just a part of basketball. You have to be able to balance and know your personnel. And so far right now, I still think we're through a period where Billy Donovan and his coaching staff are trying to see which combinations of guys. And you see that with the minute split. Like, of course, the starters have played the most minutes. And then your second most used lineup is basically your starting lineup from last year with Coby White and Ayo Dosunmu and just Zach LaVine in instead of DeMar DeRozan. So your starters and then your most familiar guys are playing the most. Outside of that, it's a wide range of combinations. The Bulls have played over 5 other combinations that have played 40 possessions or more together. So it seems like they're still trying to figure it out, right? And, that I think sometimes it's easy to kind of forget that early in the season, especially when you have had as much change and you still have had injuries with Lonzo being out and in and out the lineup, Jalen Smith missing some time. So, it's still trying to figure some things out, and hopefully that balance is struck as the season goes on. But wanted to bring those numbers to you guys. When Salim tweeted that, that's a really good conversation to have and a fair conversation to have as well. But you guys can let me know what you think on it down below. Now, the next conversation is going to be really interesting because I expect to get some kind of reactions to this one. And the question that I want to present here is, regardless of however long it goes, this isn't to say that it's going to end the season per se. We'll see what happens. But how will Zach LaVine be remembered as a Bull? And when you start looking at, Zach LaVine passed Kurt Heinrich's second all-time as far as three-pointers made. But when you start looking at all the records, the all-time records that Zach LaVine holds as a Chicago Bull, we're going to go over some of them real quick. This isn't even all of them. Zach LaVine is all-time in field goals made and field goals attempted with 3,276 field goals made. He's second all-time in threes made. He's only 18 made threes away from being number one. That's coming this season. Zach LaVine's going to get more than 18 more threes this season. He's going to pass that record. We're going to talk about by the end of the season, Zach LaVine's going to have the highest number of three-pointers made in Chicago Bulls history. He's 7th all-time in scoring right now with 9,308 points scored. Again, as long as Zach LaVine's healthy, he's going to be shooting up that list as well. And Zach LaVine could very well finish as far as points all time scored. He could very well finish in the top 5, right? Depending on how much longer he's here. When you look at it right now, he scored that 9,308. Number 5 is Jerry Sloan with 10,233. So if Zach LaVine can score another 1,000 points, that puts him this season, that puts him right there. Now, that's difficult to do, right? So maybe he has to do multiple seasons, but we're talking about realistically that Zach LaVine's about to be in top 5 all-time scoring for the Chicago Bulls, right? And that's one of his best skills, right? So we know that. He's 3rd all-time in points per game. He's 10th all-time in free throws made. He's 10th all-time in player efficiency rating as well. He's 6th in true shooting and 5th in overall plus minus. When you look at those numbers and how much he ranks in the top 10 in a lot of stats for the Chicago Bulls, then that's a conversation that a lot of franchises would be having as he's one of the best Bulls all time. Now, that is not how a lot of Bulls fans talk about him, right? And part of that comes down to this. When you look at this, Zach LaVine has done all this, right? When you look at all the offensive, because it's mainly just all offensive accolades. When you look at all that, he's not even top 10 in games played or top 10 in minutes played. He's not even in the top 10 in those areas. And so he's done it. Again, this is an era of way more scoring. The three-point shooting definitely helps in that time as well. But when you look at that and just think about it, the fact that, hey, he's not even top 10. He's not even top 10 in games played or minutes played, but he's top 10 in so many of these offensive areas. Zach LaVine is going to finish statistically as one of the best offensive players that the Chicago Bulls have ever had. Now, so part of the problem with this is that he's also not top 10 in win shares. He's not in any of the top 10 defensive lists. It's just not there. He's in the top 10 as far as most turnovers, which we all know that Zach LaVine is turnover prone. It is what it is there, right? So when you really look at this, where does that make you view, or how does that make you view Zach LaVine's time as a Chicago Bull? And my perspective on this is probably going to be different than some of the more reactionary fans. I know there are going to be some, and I'm not saying all, because we have a very smart fan base here, and I think that a lot of people are going to be able to look at it objectively, right? But this tells me that you had a talent here in Zach LaVine, a limited talent, right? Like he's not the best most well-rounded player, in the NBA. Nobody would make that excuse. He's playing great right now, right? But I think this highlights the failure of the two front offices that Zach LaVine has played under for the Chicago Bulls to really put in a position to maximize a talent that, yeah, he's not the best defensive player. He's going to turn the ball over. But you cannot deny what Zach LaVine is as a scorer, right? And some of the better franchises would have been able to build, and not necessarily build around Zach, right, per se, because we tried that, right? But to put a team around the type of talent that he is. And listen, as much as he's not in the top 10 top 10 of the Chicago Bulls in overall games played, if you built a solid enough team, you would have been able to weather some of those storms, right? And that's the way that I'm choosing to look at it. That's not to abstain Zach LaVine from his limitations as a player. No, Zach LaVine is a limited player. Yes, Zach LaVine has made some very big mistakes over the course of his career. Zach LaVine has, kind of at times been more of a me guy than a team guy at times. I'm not saying he's been that for his whole entire career, but when you look at some of the teams that Zach LaVine has had to play with, right, and how some of the front offices have had to try to convince us that the teams that were around him were teams that were really trying to compete, to me, the bigger failure, and that's not to say that Zach LaVine hasn't failed in some cases as well, but the bigger failure here is that the front office was not able to capitalize off of talent like this. Zach LaVine is a talent. And I know it became fun and whatever to kind of crap on Zach LaVine at a period of time there. It is what it is. But the fact is that Zach LaVine is, and he's always been, a talent. And he's always had a special skill of being able to score the ball, because not everybody can score the basketball like Zach LaVine. And unfortunately, he's been through a team that has gone through, 3-4 different phases while he's been on it, and none of those phases have ultimately really worked, right? Look at the initial team where he came in on, where you're trying to build a young team with him and Lauri Markkanen. You got Chris Dunn, right? And you wanted to build around that. Over the years, you drafted around that. You drafted players that just did not work out for you, or you did not develop those players, right? I think that Gar Forman and John Paxson were really kind of just drafting the draft and hoping and seeing what was going to stick without really a plan. You then get AK to come in here. He wants to build a team around Zach LaVine as the number one there, along with DeMar DeRozan. and then through injuries, through not being able to kind of fix some of that team's issues and shortcomings, that team eventually not really went anywhere either, right? And then, it just has been a calamity of things around Zach LaVine at that point. And so while I don't think very many people will try to make the case that for Zach LaVine being one of the best Bulls all time, it is what it is. That is, because wins come down to a part of that. For you to be considered one of the best players in the history of a franchise like the Chicago Bulls, even though we really got those 6 championships and a bunch of struggle other than that with the Derrick Rose era, right? Winning is kind of the most important thing and what it's going to come down to. And he's not top 10 in win shares. He's not top 10 in overall wins, right? In fact, in a lot of ways, he's in the bottom of that list by many Bulls lists. So it's just an interesting kind of balance of where Zach LaVine is. And it just put me in a place where I wanted to have an interesting conversation around the Zach LaVine thing. And, it's just funny. And whenever Zach LaVine's time here with the Chicago Bulls ends, whenever that happens, it'll be a really interesting conversation and poll with the fan base, kind of maybe give it a year, right? And ask people, like, how do they view Zach LaVine's time here, right? How will Zach LaVine be remembered as a Chicago Bull? And, maybe that time is coming up to, the end now, or maybe it's going to be years from now or whatever else it is. But it's going to be, it's an interesting thing to watch and to see how winning changes the perspective. And, some people have said, hey, why do we have a winning bias? And I say this to that. There's no such thing as a winning bias, not to me. The whole point of the game is to win, right? That's why you play the game. And so, yeah, wins are always going to be a big part over why you have that conversation. But by the way, Kobe White as well, 3rd all-time in three-pointers made for the Chicago Bulls. He's definitely proud. As long as he's a Bull, if he signs another contract with the Bull, Kobe White's going to overall be the number one. And I just say that he's on a quicker pace than Zach LaVine is. But so it's just interesting to watch. And like I said, just wanted to kind of have that high-level conversation with it. It's a living one. Let me know what you guys think on it down below. But all right, Nikola Vucevic, I also want to acknowledge Vooch. Vooch is playing as well as with Zach LaVine. Nikola Vucevic is playing at an all-star level again. When you look at it, 20.7 points per game on 59.4% shooting from the field, 48.4% shooting from three-point range. And much like the Zach LaVine conversation, for the last couple of years, a lot of Bulls fans, I won't say all, have made Nikola Vucevic the player that they blamed. And we do it every year, right? I want to be clear here. Every single year, dating back to as long as I've been a Bulls fan, when the Bulls aren't winning, the fan base, the majority of it, right, finds a player to just pinpoint that on. And I've said I'm adamantly against blaming all the team struggles on one player. People are doing it now with Josh Giddey. People were doing it at the beginning of the season with Patrick Williams. There are still people doing it with Patrick Williams. It's very rare that a team struggles come down to just one player. It's just very rare that there's a lot more complexity that goes into that. And Vooch has been that guy that has been the one that people have tried to blame for a while. But Vooch is in a more natural role to himself now. And I've said it, I said it then, the last couple of years. Imagine what Nikola Vucevic could look like if he got to his spots more naturally, right? DeMar and Vooch operated the same space. They both like to start their offense from the same spots. And Nikola Vucevic said this: it feels good. You never want to be in the game and overthink things. I think that's when you make mistakes and don't play as confidently. I just wanted to come into the season and be me, play my game. I know what I'm capable of, and I know what I can do. Starting off the year well, I just want to continue to play that way. And I think that quote speaks to him being able to be in a more natural place towards what he said it, when you overthink things. And I think that as much as we wanted it to work out with DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic, it just didn't. They occupied the same space, so it naturally had Nikola Vucevic thinking more on how and where he can get his shots. You're seeing a Nikola Vucevic that's playing more free. You're seeing a Nikola Vucevic we're playing an how many people thought that Vooch would be this effective in an up-tempo system, the fastest in the NBA? I didn't, and he's playing that and proving that he can do that. And I think that's because of when he's able to get more into his natural spots. Billy Donovan also saying he's been great. The one thing I respect about Vooch is he's always been willing to do what's best for the team. I do think the style of play has helped him because it's gotten him in space quite a bit, and he's such a great decision maker. He's playing inside the flow of the game. He knows when to shoot. He knows when to pass it. He knows when to drive. And I think that's what's helped us generate more threes this year, his playmaking. Nikola Vucevic has been really important to this Bulls team, really important to the success of this Bulls team as well this season. And I think it's something that, you got to kind of look in the weeds, right? But for a player that has been so judged by many Chicago Bulls fans over the last couple of years, I'm just good that Nikola Vucevic is having this season. Will he be an all-star? We'll see. All-stars can come from teams that don't necessarily have a lot of wins. It just depends on voting, and they weigh that, right? And we'll see. Karl Anthony Towns is probably having the best statistical season of a center in the East, but Vooch is right there. So Vooch does have a chance. And ultimately, I just want to acknowledge Vooch because, hey, he's playing really good this season, and the Vooch that we're getting is helping the Bulls be in position to win games. Of course, he's not the reason why we're winning, but he's definitely not the reason why we're losing either. So that's my thought process, and you guys can let me know how you feel on that down below. All right, let's get into the last topic today, man. The Bulls do take on the Milwaukee Bucks tonight, and this is a game where it's already been listed that Patrick Williams is questionable with a foot injury that apparently he re-aggravated landing on it a couple of games ago. He's been playing some soreness on, so we'll see what happens with Patrick Williams there. If he's down, who do they start? Is it going to be Torrey Craig? Is it going to be Julian Phillips? I doubt it's going to be Montas Bucelis, even though I know a lot of people want to see him. But overall, this is a game. This is a team that the Bulls have beat before. And I've made a lot about that, not only because of just the fact that the Bulls beat them, it's how they beat them, right? The Milwaukee Bucks are a team that struggle with teams that like to play a quick pace and like to get up a lot of threes. Those are both things that the Bulls like to do. And that can definitely help play into the weaknesses of the Milwaukee Bucks, but it's going to have to take the Chicago Bulls to be focused enough to get it done and do it, right? Execution still has to be at the forefront of everything that the Milwaukee Bucks do. They're on the road in Milwaukee today, so can they take care of business? That's the thing. Also, limiting the turnovers. The Bulls did a solid job of that in the last game. We got to continue to be a team that limits turnovers so that we can be at our best. And if the Bulls can do that, hey, this is going to help the Bulls be in the place. We're one of the better rebounding teams in the league. We're a much better rebounding team than the Milwaukee Bucks, for example. And so if we can get and keep them off the boards, that's going to help the Bulls get out in transition. That's going to help take away second chance opportunities for them as well. So the boards, our pace, and we have to shoot the ball efficiently against the Milwaukee Bucks. If we can do those things, the Bulls can win this game. This is a Milwaukee Bucks team that's been bleeding, right? And while they've been playing much better defense in the month of November, they're one of the top 10 teams defensively in the month of November so far, they still haven't quite found their rhythm as far as winning, right? So they've won 4 out of the last 10 games, which is cool. They're 4-6 in their last 10, which is much better than how they started the season off, for example. But the Bulls cannot let this be a game where the Milwaukee Bucks look amazing in. You can't allow it. And so let's hope that the Chicago Bulls are prepared for tonight. Because listen, as with every game, the Bulls can't take anything for granted. We gotta have our purpose. We gotta move with intention, and we gotta limit those turnovers. Points in the paint are going to be points in the paint, especially when you're playing a team with Giannis Antetokounmpo on it. But the Bulls got to be able to execute their offense today. It's going to be this is a game where if Patrick Williams does play, his defense is going to be really important. If he doesn't, Julian Phillips' defense is going to be really important in this game, and I would not be surprised if we do see more of Torrey Craig in this game as a veteran if Patrick Williams does not play, just because of the defensive aspect of that. So monitor it. Let's see. Hopefully we get big performances again from Coby White, Nikola Vucevic, and Zach LaVine. When they all score over 20 points, we have a good showing. So let's see what the Bulls bring tonight. We'll be live on the channel tonight for the pregame, halftime hangout, and postgame shows, all live tonight. So make sure you guys stay in tune with us on that. Love you guys. Go Bulls. You already know what it is. Make sure you guys are following the Bulls. I'm following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullsCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.